The Shadow Chancellor will announce how an incoming Labour government could deliver Britain's economic recovery. That is, if the British public vote them into government in the next general election.
Delighted to be joined now by Darren Jones, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Darren, good morning. I read an article the other day that said that you are the most appeared, for want of better English, Labour shadow front bencher on morning television. So we welcome you. We've got lots to ask you about. No cynicism here. Massive day for Rachel Reeves. This, though, my friend, is about PR and the business community in the City of London believing that Labour is a viable government, isn't it? That's what it's about today.
Well, the city and the financial markets are important stakeholders, as we saw when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng announced a load of unfunded tax cuts and the market moved against the country. People are paying the price for that still in their mortgages and their rent. So this is an important stakeholder group. The May's lecture in and of itself, though, is an important institutional lecture for any Shadow Chancellor or Chancellor. So this is a big deal and a big event for my boss, Rachel Reeves, today, and she'll be setting out over the course of about 40 or 45 minutes this evening her plan for the country to get the country back on track so that people are better off over the course of a decade of national renewal under an incoming Labour government if we are to win the election this year.
So, Darren, Rachel's due to say that Britain faces its 1979 moment. For those of us that are younger than Jeremy Kyle, can you just explain exactly what she means by that?
Well, I was born in 1986, so I have to refer a little to the history books myself.
Listen, I'll tell you, I'll educate you, Darren. In 1979, after a Labour government, and you will know this is true, and your party today is very different, there were green goddesses on the street, there was rubbish everywhere, every union wanted 30% pay increase, or they weren't going to work. The country was on its backside. That is an absolute truth.
Sure, and the country is feeling pretty desperate right now after 14 years of the Conservatives. And what Rachel Reeves is going to be setting out today is that this is the year where we have an opportunity to turn the page on those 14 years of failure. And we have an opportunity, if we seize it, to unlock huge amounts of opportunity for workers, for businesses and investors across the country so that people can see their pay improving, so the cost of bills comes down, so that businesses are growing and making more profit. And Rachel will set out that there are three pillars of her thinking about how we do that. One is around political and economic stability, which we've not had for many years now under the Conservatives. The second is about unlocking that decade of investment in our country, which is why the audience is so important this evening. And the third is about the reforms that a government are required to make in order to unlock that investment and deliver for the country.
Darren, I always love having you on, so does Nick. Let's get specific. Dentistry this morning is in every single newspaper. It seems that millions of people, maybe 12 million of us who pay taxes, cannot get a dentist appointment. In November, your party announced that part of their manifesto will be 700,000 new dental appointments. My cynicism at the time was not... I mean, you based it on this will be funded by us abolishing the non-dom tax. Now, we know that was about 3 billion quid. Usurped by the Tories, you're going to tell me they nicked our policy. What are you going to say to people this morning watching and listening who can't get a dental appointment, who think, well, hold on, how are they going to pay for that? Because it's about money. What would the Labour Party do to get dentistry back up and running in this country specifically?
Sure. So there's a short-term and a longer-term answer to that question. In the short term, we are still absolutely committed to that policy about opening up more emergency appointments with your NHS dentist and incentivising dentists to set up NHS practices in areas where there are currently none whatsoever. So we're still committed to that. You're right to point out that the way in which we were going to finance that before was the non-dom tax loophole, which the Conservatives took from us at the last budget. They were welcome to that policy. We are now going through the books and we're just putting through an internal sign-off process about how we will reallocate money to pay for that policy, which we will set out in due course. We had rather hoped there would be an election on the 2nd of May and we could do it all at the same time in the manifesto, but we're still waiting for the Prime Minister to tell us when the election will be. The longer-term answer, though, is about how you reform the NHS contract for dentists. Because the way it works is that dentists are only allowed to have a certain number of NHS appointments over the course of a year. They're called units of dental activity, UDAs. And what dentists are not allowed to do is to see a load of NHS patients in January and then run out of their slots for the rest of the year. Otherwise, they get a financial penalty. They've got to spread it across the year. And that's why if you call up your dentist for a routine appointment as an NHS patient, you might not be able to be seen next week, but you probably can be if you're paying privately. It's not because the dentist is being greedy, it's just because they're not allowed to see NHS patients.
Nick's got a question. Can I just have a very quick response to something I keep banging on about? These contracts, it seems to me not an intelligent way to run this system, where you say the NHS or whatever it is funds the training of NHS dentists, who are then free to go and work privately. Should there not be? Would Labour not consider saying within those contracts you need to commit to the NHS a majority of your time for a certain number of years, almost payback? Otherwise, what are we investing the money for?
Look, I think that's fair. It costs a lot of money for the treasury to fund doctors, dentists and other healthcare professionals, and we want them to be able to stay. I think this is predominantly an issue for clinicians as opposed to dentists. And one of the reasons that clinicians are leaving the country is because there's been such a lack of investment and support for the workforce in the NHS. We've seen the strikes, we've seen the working conditions. And understandably, especially if you're younger and trying to save up for a deposit or whatever your priorities are, if you're being offered more money and a nicer quality of life for a couple of years in Australia, you're free and single, why wouldn't you go? We've got to make the case for keeping people here. We'd rather do that with a carrot, but I think you're right, there's some stick that will be required there as well.
Okay.
And Darren, can you just tell us what the latest is on Labour's green policy? Obviously, there was that U-turn on the 28 billion in spending, but is Rachel expected to make any new announcements with regards to Labour's green policy and investment in that area?
So our mission was always to decarbonise the power sector, so generating electricity from non-fossil fuel sources. The reason that's the mission is because that's what underpins a lot of the other net zero policies. So if you're going to have electricity use for heating or your electric vehicle or your electric bike or for industry, you need more electricity and you need to be able to move it around. That's why the mission has always been that. But the vast majority of the power sector is already owned by the private sector. So it was always going to be the case that the private sector would have to pay for the upgrades that the system needs, with some support from the state for things that might be pre-commercial or where there's an argument for risk sharing with taxpayers. What we had to repackage recently was what's called our Green Prosperity Plan, which is about the amount of public subsidy going into these projects. And the reason we had to do that was because in the time between we announced it in 2021 and where we are now, the economy's gotten much worse, the cost of national borrowing has gone up, the national debt's gone up. And so we just had to be prudent and realistic with people and say, look, we're going to have to repackage the public subsidy point, but we will work in partnership with the private sector to deliver on that mission. And those private sector partners are up for the challenge.
Two very quick things. I know you're a busy man. The general public, much as you stand there rather and talk about, you know, the green agenda, two very specific things from this morning that I think will be central, and a lot of people laughed at me. The number one concern of many people in this country is something we've covered all morning, and it shouldn't be laughed at, is potholes. The state of the roads in this country, Darren, are an absolute disgrace. People's council tax bills are going through the roof. Is Labour going to make a commitment to deal with the roads? We've got a reporter out this morning. It's a disgrace, mate. People are saying that there are third world countries with better roads. This is supposed to be Great Britain. What will Labour do for roads?
Hey, look, no, you're right to talk about potholes. As a constituency MP, I do lots of events week in, week out, and potholes is always in the probably top 3 or 4 issues that people have. In fact, we even showed a film about constituency issues in the local cinema in my constituency last Thursday that we produced as an MP's office, and one of the videos was about potholes. And we asked the question, why is it that these potholes keep appearing? And it's because we do a pretty quick fix for them as opposed to maintaining the road surfaces more effectively over time. Now, to get really wonky, and I'm conscious of time, from a Treasury perspective, what happens is that every year the Chancellor would announce a pothole fund, which is a one-off amount of money. It's called capital, where people will come in and shove some tarmac in, the budget's gone, and off they go. And all of us drivers know that within 5 minutes the tarmac comes up again. The difference is that for a maintenance programme where you maintain the surface of the road effectively over time, that's a day-to-day spending. It's called resource spending, and there's not budget allocation for that. So if Labour wins the next election, one of my jobs is going to be doing something called the spending review, which is how we intend to set up the budget over at least a 3-year period, as opposed to an annual cycle as it currently is under the Tories. That gives you the opportunity to say, perhaps, you know, we might have an annual potholes fund each year. Why don't we convert that money into a 3-year maintenance programme and try to solve this problem in the long term? Those are the types of questions and the types of approaches that we'll be thinking about in relation to potholes.
I'll say one thing about you, my friend. You know you're brief. Now, I'm being told you've got to go. Have I got time to ask you one very quick question, yes or no? I've got to ask you this. Ben Wallace says cross-party MPs should sit down and agree that the defence spending in this country should go up to 3% GDP because of the concerns in the world. Very quickly, Labour, will they spend more on defence, yes or no? Because that's another thing that's massively important.
So what I can't tell you, unlike with potholes and everything else, is a detailed view about how the government currently spends the budget, because we're not allowed to see it. It's secret information. So what we've said is that coming into government, we will do something called a strategic defence review, which is perfectly normal for a new party of government, so that we can look at the detail. There's bound to be waste and money not being spent effectively that we can reprioritise. But look, we're very conscious of the fact that there's a difficult world right now. There is war in Europe, we're concerned about other parts of the country, and we want to have a strong set of armed forces that can defend our country and our borders and contribute to with NATO allies across the country.
Well, thank you so much,
Thanks.
Darren Jones, for joining us this morning, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury there.